All right, guys, welcome back to Middle American Outdoors. This is another episode of the Fireside Chats, and it's just me and Ben here tonight. Um, it is the middle of December, and here in the Midwest, there's snow on the ground in all of our locations: Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and we kind of thought no more fitting time than now to talk about late season bow tactics, but for now let's just go ahead and bring Ben on board.
How's it going, everybody?
There you go. I think it's working. If these things are coming up live and you guys can see them and comment, obviously if you see on my screen it's not working right now to show me that it's live. I can see the comments. Alex, thank you for commenting that we know it's up, at least up there. We'll definitely get this recorded over onto a podcast anyway, so people can go back and listen at their leisure. But if you do come on live, if it does happen to pop up on Facebook here eventually, or you're on YouTube, just leave comments or questions and we'll try to address that. But started off with, what have you been up to, Ben?
This last weekend, our second season of shotgun opened up. I was telling me I have a poor connection. I hope I'm not breaking up too bad. Took my son Wyatt out, and he got his first deer. I'll be putting a post up here probably this evening about that. I meant to do it last night. I just got sidetracked. Forgot about it. But man, it was bitter cold. We had that snow come in, but it was a very short hunt, thankfully. He got one right away. Open in the morning for the second season, and we just had a blast with it. The last hunt, I get to do with him before he goes out on his own into the adulting world. And other than that, I've still got a tag to fill for the shotgun season, and it's back into our late season archery there. So get geared up for that.
Awesome.
And you had a heck of a weekend too, as well, didn't you, Matt?
Yeah. You guys saw the pictures. There'll be videos and more later, but quite the muley hunt out west. It's a short hunt. But I think part of what people have to realize is it was actually the muley hunts 2 years ago in 2018. Those are the very first videos for Middle American Outdoors. My very first time filming. I was out there between rifle and muzzleloader. I want to say I was out there probably 4 weekends, so you're probably looking at 6 to 8 days of hunting in there, and long hours. I was out there with Terry most of it. Jake joined along one day back a couple years ago, but just long hours of driving all over that unit, learning all the different public properties, and even some of the private access we had that time. But so it wasn't just a show up out west and kill a mule deer on the first day. It was lots of investment 2 years ago, and just a lot of what I learned 2 years ago held true to this year to help close the deal. I knew the things that were going on out there, but I didn't know what to do with them or what they meant. And then now, fast forward 2 years of learning, and I kind of knew a little bit better of what to expect, and then textbook wise, what to expect the deer to do from that sign that I'd seen 2 years ago, and it just came together. I mean, you'll see it on the video. The deer just read the textbook, man. They read the playbook.
Well, you've studied the heck out of deer these last few years too, so it's it makes a big difference. But that time you put a lot of hours into it.
Yeah, even in the last several months, I put a lot of time into just muley focused from different people's hunts here in Nebraska and whatever you can gather from them hunting at outfitters and different stuff. But still the same deer, still the same deer behaviors. And like I said, I was able to see 2 years ago what they were doing on certain properties. Fast forward 2 years, we had a little bit more access, a little bit of understanding going into it of what some of the deer in that area were doing. And then now being able to understand what that stuff meant and what was going to happen. And Sure enough, like I said, they just read the playbook. First muley.
Now,
First
your
time
first
kill.
hunt, your first hunt out there, Matt. Did you was there a lot of frustration from that hunt for you personally?
2 years ago?
Yeah.
Definitely. Like I said, I went out there probably 4 weekends, so there's frustration on Megan's side too because I was gone for 4 weekends, and that 2 years ago, the opening morning of rifle was the very first hunt. We had a giant mule deer right outside the truck, but couldn't shoot him because one, when we're running truck, two, it's 15 minutes before legal. But we had him at 20 yards, and everything looked like it was so full of promise. You know, it's almost like when you play poker for the first time and you win big, and then you're gonna be just thinking you're gonna win big every time. So here it's very first sit, and we have a giant right outside the door. So I just thought it's gonna happen, and I could not break the drive to keep going back out there, even though we were having a hard time getting on deer or seeing deer on the property we were supposed to be on. And it was really, yeah, we've talked before, I just had too much focus on killing a deer and not enjoying being out there. And this time I went out there with a different focus and got a different result. Not that I don't think that, you know, plays a difference in your results, but I was ready to go out there and just have fun. And yeah, just happened to get the job done too.
Well, and you know, it seemed like it went fast and it was easy, but really it wasn't. I mean, you had a lot of time and just hours long hunting that built up to that quick hunt. You know.
Yeah.
It makes that success just a little more sweeter when you have a certain amount of suck, as I like to call it. You know, if you go out there that first time, you know, my first deer that I ever shot happened within minutes of the opening day, and I didn't even have to work for it. And it kind of soured me a little bit. I didn't learn to, you know, I had to learn to appreciate the hunt. And, you know, I think so if you have that certain amount of suck, when you finally do have success, it just, you know, validates all the work you put into it, and it just makes it that much sweeter when it does happen.
Yeah, Alex.
So I just want to emphasize to people that, you know, if you're not successful that first or second or third or even fourth year or on down the road, you know, don't let it get you down, because it'll happen. You put the time in, and it'll work out.
Yeah, Alex says hunting a new property is always frustrating for him. Being stalked by deer instead of the other way around. Trying to figure out the layout of the land. Time and effort, and more time and effort. Which, man, the property I killed this deer on, I don't live down there, but I know that property inside and out. From 2 years ago, boots on the ground, all the different hunts I was down there in the cold December weather. Boots on the ground in those draws, understanding that property and how they're using it. And then they, you know, that was 2 years ago, all the boots on the ground, and then studying the maps this year to refresh my mind, you know, refresh myself on it. And then Ben's having dog problems, yeah. But to refresh myself on what it would look like, so I knew what I was getting back into again this year. The very first morning, putting boots on the ground in there, I tried to put a stalk on some deer, and it just wasn't possible. But take advantage of that failed stalk and pick up a bunch of deer sign, and then put that into play into your plans. It was day one, but I hunted, I want to say close to 10 hours that day still, from, you know, the time we got up and got around and got out there. We only sat in the truck maybe 10-15 minutes past sunrise, past legal light, and then I headed out to put boots on the ground and try to, you know, I was just gonna look in the draws, and I just happened to get eyes on deer. Yeah, like I said, and then you just start putting pieces together. With Alex, you know, it was really, I had so many failed attempts 2 years ago trying to learn these muleys, and not even just 2 years ago, when I started hunting in western Nebraska, plenty of failed attempts. I never killed a deer until I got to eastern Nebraska. So years and years of failed attempts trying to learn muleys. 2 years ago, more learning. This year, the learning paid off. Just keep investing in the learning. You know, when you're in the field and when you're out of the field even, learning the difference between how the deer act. And it could not have been more classic, the difference between mule deer and whitetail deer behavior. And I mean, just a tease for the video, you guys are going to see as I'm getting ready to kill the buck, there's 18 to 20 sets of eyes and ears pinned on me. And are pinned in my direction, I would say. They're just goofy. But yeah, it's exciting. I'm excited to edit that video and show y'all. But anyway, getting into, you know, most of our listeners, I would say, most of our community and us, you know, we're all whitetail hunters. So getting into what would be applicable right now for the majority of us would be, we're going to talk about late season whitetail hunting, primarily bow focused. I mean, you can easily apply it to muzzleloader or even January late rifle in Nebraska, whatever different seasons you guys have. We're just going to talk about whitetail behavior in this time of year in the Midwest. We're going to talk about deer and what their behavior is and some tips, and then we're going to talk about the hunter and gear and some tips that we have for surviving out there. But let's see, let's jump right into it, Ben. Let's just start with what do you think about hunting this time of year? Do you like it? Do you hope to be out of the trees by now?
Oh, that was a little bit of both. I mean, I hate for deer season to be over. I actually buy more tags than I fill just so, you know, so I can be out there hunting still. My style changes a lot. I tend to use ground blinds a little more often. It's a little harder to get motivated to get out there when you know you're going to be freezing your butt off. And, you know, just recovering the deer, everything about it's harder. Aside from the deer become a little more predictable. You know, but your tactics change up a little. And I think that's kind of what I like about it. You know, hunting in this later season is, you know, it's constantly changing. Even throughout the rut, it changes. You know, where people say you got the second rut and whatnot. You know, it's not necessarily a second rut. It's just their behavior is changing a little bit. But in the later season, you know, everything becomes a little bit more predictable. Aside from major weather, you know, serious, you know, inclement weather can kind of mess with them a little bit more. But, you know, they're going to start grouping up a little bit more. Your bucks will probably start hanging out a little bit more together. So the action can actually be a little bit more exciting in my eyes. I think you see larger numbers of congregated deer in the later seasons, which is a lot of fun.
Which is especially true for mule deer. I mean, you guys would crap if you saw, I don't know if I got good video on the morning hunt, but easily 60 mule deer on the side of you know, on the south-facing slope of this draw, just feeding down into the draw in the morning. And it's just insane. For us whitetail hunters, it's like, I mean, even driving out there, the guys that are familiar with Nebraska and where we were driving and stuff, you know, Ben's familiar. It's insane. Even the whitetail are grouped up out there. Like, I mean, I drove by one cut cornfield down on a river basin, and I saw easily 40 whitetail deer out there. just
Well, and, you know, today, for instance, I picked my daughter up from school at 3:30 and drove by a field, and there was already deer pouring into it. You know, and this like I said, this colder weather just makes them a whole lot more predictable. And I knew I'd see them there. I didn't think I'd see them quite that early, but, you know, when it gets this cold, you know, And that's the other thing that I do like about hunting late season is you'll start seeing deer earlier in the day, just because they're going to be getting out there before it gets really cold, especially if there's a front moving in or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, so if we jump then into the deer, we're going to talk about the deer behavior. And some of it's me spewing textbook stuff that I read. I'll give the credit right away to Whitetail Habitat Solutions with Jeff Sturgis. I take in so much of his stuff. You know, if you guys are really wanting to invest, he has like some classes you can take, or you can just watch his YouTube hit and miss videos, his quick hitters. Great stuff. And a lot of what I spew is already been chewed from his information, basically. And then we're also going to talk about our own personal experiences. Last year I had a bow in my hand from September 1st to December 31st. And I think I had maybe a couple rifle hunts in there. But other than that, I was out there the entire duration of bow season trying to get it done. So with deer behavior, the first point we'll talk about is what Ben kind of mentioned, this idea of a second rut. How would you describe what's going on there? We're kind of out of it now, in my opinion. So it's kind of information for people to take in next year. But
I honestly think we're kind of... Hi, Curly. Oh, sorry. We're probably on the tail end of it here in Iowa and probably Nebraska as well. It's not necessarily a second rut, more so as it's the end of the rut. There's still rutting activity. You know, you'll still see deer tending to scrapes. There's always those deer that didn't get bred, that didn't stick. Happens with cattle, everything else. And then there's the younger deer that were born late in the year that are just coming into estrus late. You know, or deer that just didn't get bred at all. So I've seen rutting activity clear into January before. So there's still some of those tactics can still come into play. So don't pick them completely out of your playbook. You know, a buck will still respond to grunts. I've seen them respond to rattling clear into late December. So don't put those away yet. You know, they're still viable options. But for the majority, you know, these bucks are, you know, the first 3 weeks or so, 3 to 4 weeks, those bucks are exerting tremendous amounts of energy chasing does. Now they're starting to look for food sources to replenish that weight they lost and all that energy they lost. So your food sources become probably, in my opinion, your number one area to focus on. You know, if you can get between bedding and food sources, you're going to see deer. You know, there's just no way around it. That's at this time of year, that's the only thing on their mind, and that's where all the does are going to be. All your does are going to be bunched back up. You know, you'll start seeing those family groups of does again. You know, if they're not just getting chased all over the place. Then if you had that buck that just disappeared for no reason, you hadn't heard of it get shot, now is when he's going to start coming back home. You know, it's usually that rut hits, they go crazy. You know, he might be two miles away. He's going to come back to his home core area because that's where he feels safe. So you'll start seeing, I think you start seeing more bucks unless they all got shot. You know, they start getting back to that routine again.
Yeah. Second rut, I think most people would say you're looking at 3, 4, 5 weeks after that initial peak rut, and it's mostly like Ben said, it's in that first rut maybe 70%. You know, I'm using some Jeff Sturgis numbers here. He says about 70% or so of does get bred and take, and then there's another, so you got another 30% that haven't. And you might get the bucks are looking for that second opportunity, that second round, and So you still see the rutting activity. He also talks a lot about how you see does working scrapes really hard by second rut, and that actually is how I killed the mule deer because I was able to find a place where they were kind of getting like a evening into overnight gathering spot, and thankful, I had that fresh snow on the ground and from the night before, so when I was out the next morning you could see clearly what they had done the night before because there was no snow prior, and in this little pocket they had just tore it up in there with how many deer were trampling around, etc., so it kind of looked like, okay, once they get up and get moving, this is where they're headed to congregate, and whatever, rest up again and get ready for their evening feeding. And that's exactly how I played it, and actually was able to get them coming in. And they were up on their feet really early. We knew where they had gone to bed, so I just drove up there and looked to see if they were still in bedding or if they were on their feet, and they were on their feet in bedding 1,200 yards away from where I was going to go set up. So drove back down to the property I was hunting on and knew they were coming to that property and just got set up and waited for them. And like I said, they just followed the playbook. But some of that is stuff that you see too with the whitetails. They still give you clues, obviously. Some of the other perks, like here in Nebraska, muzzleloader isn't hunted nearly as hard as, say, rifle. So the deer start to maybe let their guards down just a little bit and start to get back to their patterning. But the next big one Ben started to talk about was food sources. So what are you looking at for food sources this time of year? How it changes, in your opinion or experience?
Well, there's not a whole lot of green stuff left. So if you can find an alfalfa field or field further west here, a lot of wheat fields for your winter wheat is kind of a primo location. Soybeans become a little more hit here in Iowa in the late season. And of course, your cornfields are always great. But the corn usually gets picked over first, and then they start hitting the beans later in the year. But if you've got something green, that's a good place to look. If you're on a river bottom, I need to research this and see what the plant's called, but it's kind of some sort of a potato or something like that, wild potato, and it keeps a green leaf through most of the winter. And I think the guys on the hunting public had something like that during muzzleloader last season, where they come across some of that. I've been seeing a lot of action on that here along the Missouri River bottom, but it's all kind of on property that I can't hunt, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But if you can find something green, that's always a big draw.
Yeah, I think, is it people you see plant turnips, basically, as far
yes,
as...
definitely. Turnips are a huge one if they find them.
Yeah.
But it's usually pretty hot and heavy on them. Once they find them, they don't last long unless you got, quite a few acres planted of it. I've got a small patch here on my place. I planted turnips last year and this year, and they're already starting to hit that a little bit. But I think here in the next week or so, they'll probably have those cleaned up.
And that was something I think maybe we tipped on earlier in some fireside chats about food plot tactics even, and when you're planting your food plots, knowing what season you're targeting. And it seemed like turnips were stuff that people were targeting late season. They were planting turnips.
Right. The thing with turnips is, in the springtime when they're first coming up, they'll eat the shoots. But once they become, 4 inches tall or so, they kind of get better and they don't touch them. So in the winter, your turnip tops will be sticking out of the ground, and they freeze and they basically die. And as they start rotting, I guess it turns to pure sugar.
Yeah.
And they just go absolutely crazy for them. It's a super high energy source.
Yep. So if you happen to be on a public piece that has food plots, or you're looking at planting food plots and you want to target late season, there you go. There's plenty of people that target late season because you catch those giants that are elusive during rifle or whatever else, and they're not as active during early season, and they're elusive during rifle, and they're smart, and then they catch them during late season because they need to eat, they need to recover from their rutting activity, and they need to eat and get ready for surviving the winter, and hunting pressure isn't quite as severe. So a lot of people target late season. Let's see.
And I found that if you have that buck that's just nocturnal all the time, late season's probably when you're going to see him on his feet in daylight.
Yeah.
I mean, the worse the weather's going to be, the better your chance is of seeing him during the daylight.
Yep. Which is, well, one more thing on food sources was recognizing what a good midday browse is going to be. So a lot of times, early and mid-season where everybody's talking about acorns and things like that, but realizing that, those food sources are probably limited and maybe they've passed over. So trying to figure out what's going to be good midday browse, because when those deer are cold and they need to get up and eat 5 times a day, and like Ben said, you'll catch them up earlier in the afternoon. They're not going to necessarily usually be out in the wide open for that midday or afternoon, but if you know where some decent midday browses with some cover or security, you can pretty much guarantee that they're going to be trying to go there. And then the only other thing I was thinking of with food is if it's not a green source, if it's a grain, it's dry, it's that wheat, not a lot of water content to it, start looking for where water's at that's not frozen. Another good way to, they got to drink, and if there's a fresh spring, like we were down in Kansas, on Sunday, and Terry was set up by kind of a fresh spring because everything else was really frozen, but he knew that this part of the creek always had running water. That's a good place to target. You don't need to set up over food. You can set up over the water, which might be greatly reduced in their availability at this time of year. Let's see. The next thing then for the deer considerations was the temperatures, which you've kind of alluded to a couple different times, but how do you look at the forecast or temperatures, and how you think it plays into when you pursue deer, Ben?
Well, the worse it's going to be, the earlier you're going to see deer on their feet, going to the big open fields. Like I said, they've kind of let their guard down. The rifle hunters, the gun hunters, pretty much gone through. And within a couple of weeks, they'll start getting into that routine again. So you'll start seeing deer in the open earlier in the day. And the worse the weather is going to be, the better those odds are. If you have a cold front coming through and the pressure's getting high, them deer are going to be up on their feet. They're not going to sit there and just take it. They've got to get that food and water in them. So if you're prepared and you can sit there, the worse the weather is going to be, probably the better the hunt is going to be. Like I said, that's when you're going to start seeing those bigger bucks.
Amen. So when we were getting ready to go out west, a week or two ago, it was really disappointing looking at the 10-day, right? I think last Monday we even talked about it, how it looked like 60s and 70s, and we were like, oh crap, I don't know, anywhere that we have good water access, it's been so incredibly dry out there. I don't know anywhere we're going to have good water access. It's going to be 60 or 70 degrees. Like, what in the heck are we going to do? And then it wasn't until a day or two before that it was like, oh, hey, it's going to be 20s all of a sudden. Which, that's how it is around here, right? And I was jumping for joy when I saw it, because I'm willing to endure knowing that I'm going to have a much better chance now. Like, I'm not going to be comfortable, but I know that I have so much better chance now. And we gone out there targeting new moon. It was actually like a waxing crescent going into a new moon on Monday. So dark overnight, bitter cold. you know it's going to drive them to try to be up and get as much food in them as they can before the night. And then also in the morning, it's going to drive them to be up as, earlier, and get moving again. But they, the other part with the temperature that plays a big role is changes. So if you look at a 48-hour forecast and it's going to be 15 or 20 degrees in the morning and fairly breezy with the bad wind chill, and then you see around, midday it rises 10 degrees and it's a lot more favorable, I mean, they're going to get up again and they're going to try to take advantage of that reasonable weather, to get out in the open and get some food in them, like Ben said, food and water. Probably no different than like humans would do. They don't want to be out there and be exposed and vulnerable, in the bitter cold. Big one with muleys, especially, and probably applies to whitetail too, is wind shifting. So like the type of hunting we were going to be doing this weekend with the Western style with the muleys is recognizing which direction the wind's blowing, where the sun exposure is when you're looking for where they're going to be bedding. That's how we found them all on that hillside. It was a northwestern wind and they're on a southeastern facing slope. So they've got the wind blowing over the top of the hill over their backs. They can smell anything coming up behind them too, but it also protects them from the wind. And then they've got the southern sun here in the northern hemisphere shining right on them. They're as warm as they can be right there. But you get a big temperature shift and the wind shifts, they're going to get up and move to try to get the best setup they can get protection-wise and staying warm. And it's a lot easier to be out there glassing for mule deer, and catch a group of 40 deer moving that were blending in before because of all the dang yucca plants and whatever else that you see in the West, that everything looks like a mule deer. But so reading the weather, understanding the weather, and then the last thing I had on the deer hunts was the difference between the AM and the PM hunts. This time of year, what do you prefer, Ben?
I prefer the evening hunts myself.
Why is that?
And probably the biggest reason is we talked about this just a little bit earlier. For me personally, where I hunt, it's really hard to get in there when everything's frozen. You don't have a chance for that sun to hit it and knock the frost off everything. And it makes it almost impossible to get in anywhere, fairly, any sort of stuff. So for me personally, just for that very simple reason, I prefer the evening hunts. But as far as seeing deer and deer movement, I don't think one is any better than the other, at least around here where I hunt. It's just they're either going to or coming from. It's just, which direction the deer are coming from. The only thing that might change my mind, to hunt a morning sit would be my wind direction. If I know they're coming from a food source and the wind is going to be in my favor to hunt this particular spot, I'm probably going to hunt morning instead of evening. But the wind is probably the only deciding factor on whether I'd hunt. Or I would hunt morning rather than evening.
Makes sense. Like I said, some of the stuff when you guys watch videos and whatever, there's textbook knowledge, and then there's just flat out what you see from experience in the trees and in the field. So some guys will say they prefer morning. The rutting activity might be a little better in the morning before they're going to bed, and that might still be true. I agree with Ben. In general, I prefer evening hunts. As a self-filmer, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to sneak in there way early, like at noon, and get set up and wait for a long time for the deer activity to come. Just like with the mule deer, I sat up in a tree actually in my saddle, and I went way ahead of them. and got sat up, and I was just going to wait for them to come to me, as long as it would take. And if you're doing that this time of year, even with the whitetail, like we were talking about, where they're having to get up earlier to feed fast before the big front comes in, or the crazy cold sets in overnight when the sun goes down, it's a lot easier to go in the evening and get into a place, especially if you know where they're bedding and you can avoid it, and try to get to where they're heading to out of their bedding. Just seems so much easier to do in the afternoon. Plus it's warmer. You know, the hunt starts off maybe a little bit more comfortable for the hunter that way, and you can always put more layers on, those kind of things. Yeah, I agree. In this area, I prefer hunting evenings, and for a ton of different reasons, all year long, really. I like it here because I like it at this time of year because you do see more consistent deer activity earlier, I feel like, because of the cold weather. So that's
another thing that's really cool about the winter hunts, the late season, is if you're in an area that does snow, you know what the deer are doing that day. Like, your deer sign is brand new, fresh, and it's kind of a game changer. It's almost cheating. It's kind of your ace in the hole. You can go out there after a fresh snow, let it sit for a day, go out to the property, and you know what those deer did that day.
Yep.
So it tells you, it shows their hand 100% what they're doing.
Yep. Yeah, guys will see in the video on the muley hunt. I mean, there was no snow on the ground Friday morning. As I'm driving out there, it's snowing pretty good. And so all that snow is Friday evening into the overnight. So then Saturday morning when I wake up and we start hunting and I go on the spot and stock, and I can see, we could even look down in a draw as we were glassing into the snow with the spotting scopes and stuff, and you could see that there was no deer tracked through the snow in the bottom of these draws and stuff, so you just knew they hadn't been there in the last 12 to 18 hours. Move on kind of thing. But in this area, then when I found that hole, let's say, as I was walking across this milo field, it just looked like 800 deer had been in there. Like, you couldn't look anywhere without deer tracks. And so you know that happened last night. So they're going to do it again, most likely, unless conditions completely change. But if conditions stay the same, they're probably going to do that same thing again. So let's hone in on this. I get down in that hole, and they just had dug scrapes everywhere. And the real tall tale sign was their beds. Like, when you guys just learn how to read their beds, and these beds weren't perfectly clean circles with snow around them, as if they had been laying there while it was snowing. They were circles with 6 inches of ice and then snow. So like, they had come in and laid down after it had snowed a lot, and a lot of it had melted under their core, but the rest of it was just basically iced around the edges. So it really just made it clear that they had been in here last night. They had bedded down in here after it snowed hard. So they're most likely coming in here during the late evening, overnight hours as like a resting, gathering place before they go out to feed again on another overnight feed. So not only do you have deer sign, you have timing of, this is what time I expect them in here. It just worked out perfectly. But some of it is you have to know how to read that, and that comes from spending the time learning through whatever method you prefer, whether it's textbooks or YouTube videos or podcasts or real life experience, all of it put together, whatever it is. It just, for me, it paid off that day from having all that experience. Let's see. So we've covered the deer, unless you have anything else on deer that you want to hit.
No, that's pretty cut dry.
Then the next one then is gear. So the first part I have is, do you just want to go over real quick some of your cold weather tips? If you guys saw the video of Ben's hunt, I believe it was like October 26th, I want to say. and he gave a lot of
something like that.
a lot of good cold weather tips, and you could always go back and look at that. I think it's called like First Snow in Iowa or something like that in our hunting.
Yeah, that was our first freak snowstorm we had.
Yeah, and you ate it walking
So
there.
basically, your cold weather for me, the biggest thing is just don't get overheated. If you don't want to get cold, don't get hot. And that's even when you're just sitting there. You got after you put all your layers on. If you're feeling overly comfortable, you're probably too warm and you're sweating. When it's cold out, you don't really realize you're sweating until it's too late. So if you're walking into an area and you're going to be sitting, the biggest thing is go in uncomfortable. You want to go in with the bare minimum on your body. I've literally walked in long johns before because I was going a long way and I was carrying a lot. So I've got my boots and my long johns, no gloves on because I'm very active. So I'm building heat. Get to where you're at. Let yourself dry. Don't just get there and start throwing stuff on. You're going to get cold, but you want to make sure your base layers are dry. And then when you pack your stuff, you want to pack it in your last layer first. That way you put everything on in order. You're not digging through stuff trying to find what you need. Build your layers out. And I'm a big believer in Sitka stuff. There's other good stuff out there. But your base layers are your most important. So you want something that's going to be wicking and fast drying and keep that moisture off your skin. Avoid anything cotton, your cotton socks especially. And just build your layers out to where you can take stuff off of it if you do get too warm. With your feet, I hear a lot of people complain about their hands and their feet because they get too cold. With your feet, most people wear cotton socks. The socks you wear every day for your everyday life are not what you want to wear when you hunt. Get some good high quality wool socks or merino wool. And don't get boots that are over insulated. Because if you wear those in, your feet are sweating and they're gonna get cold. It's gonna happen. So I always take a change of socks. So when I get to my stand, I'll take my boots off, get my feet dry, and change my socks when I get to the stand. Another trick with your feet that I have found very effective is to use a spray antiperspirant on your feet just to keep them from sweating. That was when I finally figured that out. It was kind of a game changer for me, and I actually wear an uninsulated boot with a good wool sock, and my feet don't get so cold. With your hands, a lot of times I don't even wear gloves at all, especially if I'm hunting with a bow because I like to have that dexterity. And if I do wear gloves, they're just really thin, basically a base layer glove or something that you might wear turkey hunting. And that's just to keep if I have to touch something metal, it just keeps that metal on skin contact away. So I'll wear those climbing this tree stand or, climbing sticks or whatever, or grabbing my bow if it's really cold out. But what I do to keep my hands warm is, since I got the Sitka stuff, it has a through pocket in the front. So you can throw a hand warmer in there and keep both hands warm, and it's a very well insulated coat. So, until I go to pull my hands out, they're not exposed to the weather at all, and they stay very comfortable. If you don't have a coat with a through pocket on it, get you a hand muff. The same principle. I have yet for my hands to get cold while I'm hunting. And those rechargeable hand warmers are absolutely amazing. I'm probably going to buy more of them, have a backup, have one in the truck. Each of the kids will have one. They only last about 6 hours on the highest setting. I think, is it HME that makes those?
I think it was HME made some, yeah.
But and I think Zippo would just come out with one. I seen one at Walmart here the other day. I think it was Zippo. Pretty much the same thing. I haven't bought one yet to try it out, but I will. those, and the nice thing about them is they're also a battery pack as well. So
Yeah.
That's pretty much the tips I have for, for cold weather stuff. Just don't get too hot. That's the killer for most people.
Yeah. I do all the same stuff, so not a ton to add to that. I would say I tend to handle cold weather pretty well. So I don't usually, just hunting last weekend, I was telling Jake, like, I feel like I get so locked in the tree that I don't even realize that my feet hurt or my hands hurt. There's like, even this weekend, there was a time where we got out and I realized, like, dang, my feet are frozen and they kind of hurt now. But while we were hunting, I was so locked in, like, I wasn't even recognizing that was going on necessarily. But also very blessed to have the Sitka gear. I'm with Ben. I fully am invested into that stuff because it's crazy. I mean, one time this weekend I had on 5 layers of upper, and you would not, I had full movement. I did not feel like a big old marshmallow man or puffed out or like I was limited in any way. They truly are gear in what they're able to do. And the Fanatic stuff is like, gosh, man, Saturday night I had the Fanatic vest on in the tree and I had to take it off because I was sweating. It was like 20 something degrees and a slight breeze in my face, and I had to take it off because I was really getting hot in the tree. Yeah, it's good stuff. Then the point that I was going to talk about was different activities, like when you're in the stand. Then there's a lot more we could go over as far as like how to endure and stay in the stand. Your clothing and all that stuff Ben just talked about. Those are the biggest tips that are going to make the biggest difference. And some important stuff to think about in the stand is, let's say, like your optics. What kind of optics do you have? Are they going to fog up? Did you spend a few extra dollars and get fog resistant because you've got them under your clothing or something and they're nice and warm, and you take them out into the bitter cold and now they fog up? Or you have them out in the bitter cold and then you put them up to your face and they warm up and now they fog up when you need them the most, or anything like that. And really, I guess the biggest one, and you'll see we post this on some videos, get moving from time to time. You don't realize how much your arms and your muscles are freezing. And even the bow, I do a lot of practice draws, especially when it's super cold out, just to make sure that I'm staying warm enough, that my muscles are staying warm enough and loose enough. And you can't keep the bow from freezing, but I like to think in my mind that I'm keeping the bow warmed up and loosened up as well. But I think that's really important, so that you don't go to pick up the bow and that buck that you've been waiting for in the middle of December in this freezing cold, you finally get that opportunity we're all talking about, and you're so cold you can't draw that bow anymore. It's happened to me before. You guys see that, like, I've in the last 12 months been a nut about working out and putting on like 20 pounds of muscle, because that kicked my butt last year, not being able to draw my bow back in the cold. Struggling with it and giving yourself away, or not being able to draw it and having to turn it down in the tree just so you can draw it, and now your pins aren't accurate. Those things can really kill you if you overlook them. But let's see, that was basically the two things I would think about with the tree. Safety wise, taking your time, extra time, making sure that you're not going to slip on your metal sticks and whatever else with your rubber boots on. And then also, having battery power, backup battery power, so your phone doesn't die on you, and anything like that. But yeah, do you got anything, Ben, that you do for you while you're in the tree in the cold?
Oh, just like basically what you said, just stay limbered up. To add to that, I would say it's good practice to go out and shoot your bow, especially now that it's cool off. Put on all those layers, go out in the yard or the range and shoot your bow with all that stuff on so you're familiar with it. I think it was last year you got an experience with that where you went to shoot your bow and was it your sleeve or something was in the way or something? So, make sure you're shooting, spending some time with that, with all that extra stuff on, and know how you're going to have to, you might have to adjust your, how you hold your bow or something. If nothing else, build that awareness of your clothing that you have on, how it's going to affect your shot, and your, how you hold your bow.
Yep, dead on. Yeah, I caught my collar in the string. Tuck your collars in. That's one thing. Tuck your lead arm collar in. That really helps a lot. So that's what happened to me. I had actually done like Ben was saying. I had shot with the bow with those clothes on in preparation. I just, and even when I got in the tree that day, I had gotten into the different shooting lane positions in that tree. I just hadn't put the two together. So once I got colder and I had to put that coat on, and now I'm shooting in a weird position out of this tree, the two things apart from each other were okay, but together was a bad combination, and it put me in a bad angle. And my collar got caught in the string as I let the arrow loose, and yeah, missed a giant. But let's see. So yeah, I guess that's our tips for late season bow hunting whitetail, with a little bit of recap of the mule deer hunt that's coming and some other stuff we got coming. But what do you think, Carly? Do you get out in the cold? She gone. So I think that'll do it for this
She
week.
got Cheetos in her teeth.
I'll pretty much wrap it up for this week. I think next week we'll try to be back on Monday night, I think. I don't know. We'll try to get it ironed out. But for now, guys, we thank you for participating, and we'll catch you next time.